She had dreamed of this day for as long as she could remember. The chance to play in front of a large audience, to let her music be heard by people who had dedicated their lives to the art, was more than thrilling. It was terrifying. The hall was enormous, with polished wooden floors and walls that seemed to echo every whisper and footstep. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the rows of seats, each one filled with faces that would judge her, admire her, or dismiss her before she even began. She gripped her music bag tightly, her fingers trembling slightly, and took a deep breath to calm the nervous whirlwind inside her. She tried to remind herself that she had practiced for this moment for years, but nerves were relentless. She stepped onto the stage, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. A hush fell over the audience, and she felt every eye on her, weighing her. She looked out into the crowd, trying to focus on the music that had been her constant companion for so many years. She adjusted the bench in front of the grand piano and sat down, her heart beating faster with each passing second. In the front row sat the famous pianist. Everyone knew his name, his talent, and his reputation. He had performed on the most prestigious stages, received countless awards, and taught many young musicians who looked up to him. But he was known not only for his skill but for his sharp tongue and critical eye. Today, his gaze fell on her, and she could feel his smirk even from across the stage. It was the kind of smirk that suggested amusement at her presence, a hint of disbelief that someone like her could even dare to play in this hall. She swallowed hard, trying not to let his expression affect her. The audience shifted in their seats, some whispering to each other, likely expecting to see a young amateur falter. She could hear the faint rustle of programs and the creak of the wooden seats as people settled in. Her stomach twisted, but she reminded herself that she had prepared for this. She had spent countless nights practicing, hours repeating scales, and perfecting every piece she intended to perform. She knew the music, she felt it in her bones, and she hoped that was enough. As she sat there, her mind briefly wandered to how she had come here. She remembered her small practice room at home, the piano with keys worn from years of use, and the moments when her fingers seemed to fly across the keys effortlessly. She remembered the first time she had dared to play a difficult piece, her hands shaking with fear but refusing to give up. Every hour of practice, every moment of self-doubt, and every tiny victory had led her to this stage. She took another deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. Then, the famous pianist leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing with amusement. He laughed softly, a sound that cut through the nervous energy in the room. It was not a loud laugh, but it carried the weight of condescension. A few in the audience even chuckled along with him, the sound unsettling her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the expectation that she would fail. But rather than shrink back, she let that laughter ignite something within her. It became a spark of determination, a reminder that this moment was hers to own. She opened her eyes, looked at the piano, and let her fingers hover over the keys. The hall was silent now, the anticipation almost tangible. She reminded herself that music was her language, the way she communicated emotions too deep for words. The laughter of the famous pianist and the whispers of the audience would not define her. She could prove that her music had a story, and that story was hers to tell. Her first touch on the keys was tentative, a soft note that resonated through the hall. She felt the vibration through her fingers and into her heart. She closed her eyes, letting her hands move as they had practiced countless times before. The notes began to flow, delicate at first, then gaining confidence with each measure. She felt herself slipping into a rhythm, the music taking over her mind and body. The nervous energy that had threatened to overwhelm her began to transform into focus and strength. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the famous pianist still watching, his smirk unchanged. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a quiet determination. She played on, pouring every ounce of her passion into the performance. The melody rose and fell, carrying the emotions she had bottled up for so long: hope, fear, joy, and sorrow. The audience was silent, captivated by the unexpected depth and beauty of her playing. Even those who had expected a weak performance were now leaning forward, drawn into the music. She thought of all the people who had doubted her, all the moments when she had questioned her own talent. They faded away as her fingers danced across the keys. She was no longer a nervous girl on a stage. She was a storyteller, speaking in the language she knew best. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence, each phrase a chapter in the story she was telling. The famous pianist's expression began to shift ever so slightly. His eyes widened just a fraction, a hint that he was no longer mocking but observing with genuine curiosity. She did not notice it, too absorbed in the music. The hall seemed to disappear around her, leaving only the piano, the music, and the emotions she was channeling. The laughter that had once threatened to undermine her confidence was now a distant memory, replaced by the clarity of her purpose. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. She was aware of every detail, the shine of the piano, the soft glow of the lights, the barely perceptible rustle of the audience, but none of it distracted her. The music was everything, and it carried her through the first piece, every note building on the last, every pause deliberate and filled with intention. She could feel the energy of the audience responding to her, a subtle but undeniable connection forming between her and the people watching. By the time she finished the piece, the hall was completely silent for a heartbeat. Her hands hovered over the keys, waiting, not for applause, but for acknowledgement that her music had reached its intended place. Then, a single clap broke the silence, tentative but growing quickly as more joined in. She looked up briefly and saw the famous pianist sitting back slightly, no longer laughing. The smirk was gone, replaced by an expression she could not quite read. Interest, surprise, maybe even respect. The realization that she had captured the attention of someone so renowned gave her a quiet surge of pride. She stood, allowing herself a small smile as the applause continued. The initial fear and anxiety that had plagued her moments before had been replaced by a sense of accomplishment. She had faced the scrutiny of a critical audience and a mocking pianist, and she had let her music speak for itself. She knew that this was only the beginning, that many challenges and judgments lay ahead, but for this moment, she had triumphed in her own quiet way. As she left the stage, her steps were lighter, her heart full. She carried with her not just the memory of the performance, but the feeling that she had proven something important. Not to the famous pianist, not to the audience, but to herself. She had faced fear and ridicule and had let her talent shine, however briefly. It was a lesson she would carry forever. That courage, practice, and belief in oneself could turn even the most daunting moments into triumphs. Backstage, she took a moment to catch her breath. The hall was still buzzing with murmurs and excitement. She had heard some comments about her performance, and while not everyone would remember it, she knew she had left a mark. The experience was humbling but invigorating, a reminder that every note played with honesty and passion had the power to change perceptions and touch hearts. The famous pianist would remember her, and so would she, not for his mocking, but for the way she had risen above it. As she walked away from the piano, she allowed herself a quiet laugh, a release of tension that had built up over the past few hours. She had done it. She had faced her fear, faced ridicule, and had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger and more confident. The memory of the smirk that had greeted her arrival no longer held power over her. Instead, she held onto the music, the applause, and the knowledge that she had proven her worth through her own talent and determination. This was only the first step, but it was a step she would never forget. The applause from the first piece still echoed in her ears as she took a moment to steady herself for the next one. Her fingers hovered over the keys, poised to begin, yet she could feel the lingering tension from the first performance pressing on her shoulders. The famous pianist sat in the front row, his gaze now sharper, more scrutinizing than before. There was no mockery in his expression this time, only a watchful curiosity, as if he was trying to anticipate what she might do next. She could feel the collective attention of the audience on her, each pair of eyes silently questioning her ability to sustain what she had just achieved. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that music was not just about skill but about emotion, about telling a story through sound. The hall was quiet now, save for the soft hum of anticipation. She allowed her fingers to touch the keys gently, producing the first notes of her second piece. It was a delicate melody at first, almost fragile, carrying a sense of longing and subtle sadness. The notes seemed to float in the air, reaching the audience before they even realized it. She felt the music weaving through the room, touching the walls and the ceiling, finding its way into every corner. She closed her eyes, letting her emotions guide her fingers, trusting that the audience would feel the sincerity in each note. Slowly, the melody began to build, gaining confidence and depth. The initial fragility gave way to a richer, more complex sound, as if the music itself was coming alive. Each chord carried weight, each pause held meaning. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience, the slight lean forward, the eyes widening, the fingers tapping gently in appreciation. Even the famous pianist's eyebrows raised slightly, a flicker of surprise passing across his face. She did not allow herself to be distracted by these reactions, instead using them as fuel to pour even more passion into her performance. She thought of every challenge she had faced as a musician, the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt when she had wondered if she was good enough. She thought of the nights she had spent perfecting pieces that seemed impossible at first, and how every small victory had built the foundation for this moment. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently now, yet every note was deliberate, each one shaped with care and intention. She felt the music flow through her as if it were an extension of her own thoughts and feelings. The hall seemed to respond to her energy. The audience, once skeptical, now leaned into the performance, drawn in by the sheer intensity and emotion of her playing. There was a collective sense of anticipation, a silent agreement that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. She could hear the faint rustle of dresses and suits as people shifted in their seats, trying to get closer to the sound, to absorb every nuance. The music had become a conversation, an exchange of emotions between her and the listeners, transcending words and reaching directly into their hearts. As she reached the middle of the piece, she introduced a series of fast, intricate passages, her fingers dancing over the keys with precision and fluidity. The complexity of the music was no longer a challenge but an opportunity to express herself fully. The audience gasped softly in surprise at the skill and grace with which she executed each passage. She could sense the famous pianist leaning forward slightly, his eyes now fixed intently on her hands, perhaps realizing that he had underestimated her. His expression was a mix of astonishment and respect, a silent acknowledgement of the talent he had witnessed. She allowed the melody to rise and fall, creating waves of sound that carried the audience on a journey of emotion. There were moments of quiet introspection, moments of soaring triumph, and moments of subtle playfulness. She played not for recognition or approval, but because the music demanded it. Each note was a reflection of her own experiences, her joys, her sorrows, her hopes, and her fears. The audience could feel it, could see it in the way she moved, in the intensity of her focus, in the passion that radiated from every gesture. The room was no longer just a concert hall. It had become a space of shared experience. Every listener was drawn into her story, carried along by the ebb and flow of the music. She noticed a few in the audience closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others sat rigidly, unable to look away, captivated by the precision and emotion of her performance. Even those who had initially doubted her could not help but be moved by the power of her expression. She approached the final section of the piece, a slow, powerful crescendo that demanded full control and emotional depth. Her hands moved with deliberate strength, commanding the keys with authority and grace. The music reached its peak, filling the hall with a richness and intensity that seemed almost tangible. She felt her own heart racing in time with the rhythm, her breath synchronized with each phrase. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every note, every chord, every pause. The room was charged with energy, as if everyone present understood that they were witnessing something truly remarkable. As the last notes lingered in the air, she allowed them to fade naturally, giving each sound space to resonate. She sat back slightly, her fingers resting gently on the keys, savoring the moment of completion. The silence that followed was profound, a collective exhale of awe and appreciation. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the scene before her. The audience was no longer skeptical. Their faces were alight with admiration and amazement. Some were clapping softly, unsure how to express the depth of their reaction, while others simply sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the performance. The famous pianist sat motionless for a moment, his expression unreadable, before slowly nodding his head in acknowledgement. There was no laughter, no smirk, only the quiet, undeniable recognition of her talent. It was a moment of validation, not just from the audience, but from someone whose opinion she had feared most. She felt a surge of quiet triumph, a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond words. She had played from her heart, allowed her emotions to guide her, and in doing so had transformed doubt into admiration. She rose from the piano slowly, giving the audience a chance to absorb the final notes and the silence that followed. The applause began to build, starting softly and growing into a thunderous wave of sound. She felt it wash over her, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. People stood, clapped, and cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in awe. She took a small bow, feeling the connection between herself and the audience, a bond forged through music and shared emotion. Backstage, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. She knew that this was a turning point, a moment that would stay with her forever. The laughter and mockery that had greeted her earlier were now distant memories, overshadowed by the recognition of her talent and the impact of her music. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to perform, to express herself, and to touch the hearts of those who had listened. She glanced at the famous pianist one last time before leaving the stage. He was still watching, his eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and surprise. She understood that he had seen something in her that went beyond technical skill, something authentic and powerful that could not be ignored. It was a silent acknowledgement of her journey, her dedication, and her passion for music. As she walked away from the piano, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her. The experience had not only proven her abilities to others, but had strengthened her belief in herself. She realized that music was more than notes on a page or applause from an audience. It was a language of the soul, a way to communicate emotions too deep for words. And she had spoken that language with honesty, courage, and grace. The journey was far from over, but this performance had marked the beginning of something new. She had faced fear, ridicule, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever. The connection she had made with the audience, the silent recognition from the famous pianist, and the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself would guide her in the performances to come. She walked off the stage with a sense of fulfillment, carrying the music in her heart, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she had the power to move hearts and change perceptions with the simple, profound act of playing from within. She returned to the piano for her third piece, her heart still racing from the response to her second performance. The applause had given her a small boost, but she knew the real test was yet to come. She could feel the weight of the famous pianist's eyes on her, analyzing, judging, perhaps even questioning what she was capable of. The audience, now fully attentive, waited in anticipation, curious to see what she would do next. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this moment was hers, that every note she played carried her voice, her story. The first notes came softly, almost tentatively, but there was a new confidence beneath them. She had felt the audience respond to her second piece, and it encouraged her to pour more of herself into the music. Each chord she struck resonated with her own experiences, the struggles she had endured, the late nights spent practicing, the small victories that had built her skill and confidence. The melody she created began to swell, moving gracefully across the keys, a living, breathing extension of her emotions. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel every note, every pause, every nuance. The music shifted, carrying a more complex rhythm that demanded her full attention and skill. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision, each movement deliberate, each note intentional. The hall seemed to respond, the air charged with a quiet tension that mirrored her own excitement. She could feel the audience leaning forward in their seats, drawn into the story unfolding before them. There was a collective sense of anticipation, as though everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. The famous pianist, once mocking, now looked on with genuine interest. He watched her hands with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, his earlier amusement replaced by a growing respect. She could not see the subtle changes in his expression as she played, too absorbed in the music, but she could feel a shift in the energy of the room. The laughter that had once threatened to undermine her confidence was gone, replaced by a shared admiration for the skill and passion she displayed. As she reached the middle of the piece, she introduced a series of challenging passages that tested her speed, accuracy, and control. Each note was executed with care, each phrase flowing naturally into the next. The audience reacted instinctively, their faces showing amazement and appreciation. Some whispered softly to each other, unable to contain their awe, while others sat in rapt silence, completely absorbed by the performance. She had captured their attention, their emotions, and their hearts. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on how far she had come. There had been times when she doubted herself, when the music seemed beyond her reach, when the fear of failure had threatened to stop her. But here she was on a stage, performing for a discerning audience, and her music was speaking for itself. She realized that every challenge she had faced, every moment of doubt, had prepared her for this very moment. The complexity of the piece, the scrutiny of the famous pianist, and the expectations of the audience all became part of her story, part of the music she was creating. The melody began to rise in intensity, the notes cascading like a waterfall, each one building upon the last. She could feel the power of the music flowing through her, connecting her to the audience in a way words could never achieve. The famous pianist leaned forward slightly, his eyes widening as he took in the skill and emotion displayed in every phrase. He could see the hours of practice, the dedication, and the resilience that had brought her to this stage. The mockery that had once defined his opinion of her seemed inconceivable now. The hall was filled with a sense of awe and wonder. The audience was no longer merely listening. They were experiencing the music alongside her. Every rise and fall of the melody drew them deeper into the performance, creating a shared journey of emotion and expression. She could sense the collective heartbeat of the room, the subtle gasps and murmurs of amazement, the soft exhalations of those moved by the beauty and intensity of the music. It was as if the hall itself had become part of the performance, resonating with the energy and passion she poured into every note. She introduced a softer, more reflective section, allowing the music to breathe and the audience to absorb the emotions she conveyed. It was a delicate, intimate moment, a contrast to the powerful crescendos that had come before. Her fingers moved gently across the keys, each note carrying a story of perseverance and hope. She felt a deep connection to the music, a sense of unity with the audience, as though they were all part of the same journey. The famous pianist's expression softened, his admiration growing with each passing moment. As the piece progressed, she began to incorporate unexpected flourishes, subtle changes in tempo and dynamics that demonstrated not only her technical skill but her creativity and musical intuition. The audience responded instinctively, drawn to the originality and depth of her interpretation. They could feel the story unfolding, the emotions rising and falling, the narrative told through each note and pause. She had transformed her initial nervousness into a performance that captivated everyone present, leaving no room for doubt. The final section of the piece was a powerful, soaring crescendo, demanding full control and emotional depth. She played with intensity and precision, every movement of her hands deliberate and expressive. The hall was completely silent, the audience holding their collective breath, utterly absorbed in the performance. The famous pianist sat forward, his eyes fixed on her hands, clearly impressed by the mastery and emotion she displayed. The music reached its climax, filling the hall with a rich, resonant sound that seemed to touch everyone present. As the last notes echoed and slowly faded into silence, She allowed them to linger, savoring the completion of the piece. The room remained still for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. The audience rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, some wiping away tears, others smiling in sheer amazement. The famous pianist finally stood, his expression a mix of respect and astonishment. He approached her, nodding in acknowledgement of her extraordinary talent. The moment was both humbling and exhilarating, a validation of her years of hard work and dedication. She bowed gracefully, her heart swelling with pride and relief. The journey from doubt and mockery to recognition and admiration had been intense, but she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more determined. She had allowed her music to speak for her, conveying emotions that words could not capture. The applause continued, the energy in the hall electric, a testament to the connection she had forged with her audience. Backstage, she took a moment to catch her breath, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. She reflected on the path that had brought her here, the countless hours of practice, the moments of self-doubt, and the perseverance that had carried her through. The laughter and mockery of the famous pianist that had once threatened to undermine her confidence now seemed insignificant. What mattered was the music she had played, the emotions she had conveyed, and the impact she had made on those who had listened. She knew that this performance marked a turning point, not just in the eyes of the audience but in her own understanding of herself as a musician. She had faced scrutiny, ridicule, and fear, and had transformed them into a performance that captivated, inspired, and moved people. The recognition from the famous pianist, the admiration of the audience, and the sense of personal accomplishment all reinforced the knowledge that she had achieved something extraordinary. As she left the stage, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. The experience had shown her that talent alone was not enough. It was the courage to face challenges, the willingness to take risks, and the authenticity of expression that truly defined a great musician. She had spoken through her music in a way that transcended technical skill, reaching the hearts and minds of those who listened. This understanding would guide her in future performances, reminding her that every note played with honesty and passion had the power to change perceptions and touch lives. She walked off the stage with a quiet smile, carrying the music within her and the knowledge that she had proven herself. The applause and admiration were external validation, but the true victory lay in her own understanding of what she had accomplished. She had faced mockery, doubt, and fear, and had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, more confident, and more capable than ever before. This turning point would stay with her, a reminder of the power of perseverance, courage, and the transformative force of music. She approached the piano for her fourth piece, her heart still racing from the previous performance. The applause from the audience still lingered in her mind, giving her a small boost of confidence. But she knew the real challenge was not just to play correctly, but to touch the hearts of those listening. The famous pianist in the front row had stopped his smirk entirely. His eyes were now focused, observing every movement, every note, every expression on her face. The audience had changed as well. What had begun as curiosity or doubt was now genuine anticipation, a desire to experience the story she would tell through her music. She placed her fingers on the keys and let the first soft notes drift into the air. They were gentle, fragile, and almost hesitant, but they held a sincerity that could not be ignored. She allowed herself to feel every emotion, every memory, every hope and fear, and let them flow through her hands. The audience seemed to hold their breath, leaning forward as if trying to catch the invisible thread of emotion that she was weaving through the room. The famous pianist, for the first time, looked genuinely intrigued, his eyes widening slightly as he began to recognize the depth of her talent. As the melody grew, she introduced more intricate passages, her fingers dancing across the keys with a grace and control that amazed even her. The music swelled and contracted, moving in waves of emotion that carried the audience along. She felt the energy of the room respond to her, the tension melting into wonder, awe, and admiration. She had become more than a performer. She had become a storyteller, guiding everyone in the hall through her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The famous pianist leaned forward slightly, clearly captivated by the skill and feeling in every note. He had seen many musicians in his life, but something about the way she played held a rare authenticity. Her performance was not just about technique, it was about connection. Each note she played seemed to reach out to each listener individually, touching their hearts and resonating with their experiences. She did not need to look at him to know that he had been silenced, that the mocking smile was gone, replaced by genuine appreciation. She continued to play, allowing the music to tell her story. There were moments of soft introspection, moments of quiet reflection, and moments of soaring triumph. She incorporated subtle variations, small improvisations that added depth and originality to her performance. The audience noticed these details, their eyes widening in recognition, their expressions softening with admiration. Some could not contain their reactions and whispered softly to each other, sharing their awe. Others simply sat quietly, absorbed completely in the experience. The crescendo of the piece approached, and she felt a rush of exhilaration. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, yet every note was deliberate and precise. She could feel the emotions of the audience matching the intensity of the music, a shared heartbeat that connected her to everyone in the hall. The famous pianist's expression was unreadable, but she sensed a quiet acknowledgement, a respect that had not been present before. She played with her whole being, allowing every experience, every triumph, every failure to be expressed through the music. The final section of the piece demanded the full strength of her skill and emotion. She played with intensity and grace, building the sound into a powerful, resonant crescendo. The room was completely silent, the audience holding their collective breath as they were drawn into every note, every pause, every subtle nuance. She felt a surge of energy from the room, a wave of connection that carried her through the final notes. She allowed the last sound to linger, stretching it just long enough to let the emotion settle in the hearts of the listeners. The silence that followed was profound, a shared moment of awe that filled the room. Then, gradually, the audience erupted into applause, first soft, then building into a thunderous ovation. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in admiration. The famous pianist also stood, clapping slowly but deliberately, his expression a mixture of respect, astonishment, and admiration. He approached her after the performance, nodding his head in acknowledgement of her extraordinary skill and the emotions she had conveyed. She bowed deeply, allowing herself to feel the full weight of the moment. This was more than recognition. It was validation of years of hard work, dedication, and the courage to face doubt and fear. The audience's reaction had confirmed what she had always hoped, that her music could touch people, move them, and create a shared experience that transcended words. The applause continued, echoing in the hall, as if celebrating not just her performance, but the triumph of perseverance, passion, and authenticity. Backstage, she finally allowed herself to breathe, her hands still tingling from the intensity of the performance. She reflected on what had just happened, realizing that she had not only won the respect of the audience, but had also transformed the perception of the famous pianist. The laughter and mockery that had greeted her at the beginning of the day now seemed insignificant, replaced by the genuine admiration of everyone who had witnessed her performance. She felt a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that she had shared her true self through the music. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the challenges she had faced, and the determination that had driven her forward. Every struggle, every setback, and every small victory had led to this moment of connection and triumph. She understood now that music was more than notes on a page. It was a language of emotion, a way to communicate experiences and feelings that words could not express. She had spoken that language with sincerity and skill, and the audience had understood. The famous pianist approached her once more, this time with a smile of genuine respect. He offered a few words of praise, acknowledging her talent, creativity, and the power of her performance. She listened humbly, feeling a mixture of gratitude and validation. The recognition from someone of his stature was meaningful, But even more important was the realization that she had proven to herself that she could rise above fear and doubt and share her gift with the world. As she left the stage, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. The performance had been a turning point, a moment that would stay with her forever. She had faced skepticism, mockery, and fear, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more capable than ever before. The experience had shown her that courage, dedication, and authenticity could overcome even the harshest judgments, and that music had the power to create profound connections between people. She walked through the backstage area, feeling the echoes of applause still resonating in her mind. The excitement of the audience, the respect of the famous pianist, and the personal fulfillment she felt combined to create a powerful sense of achievement. She knew that her journey as a musician was just beginning, but this experience had given her a foundation of confidence and inspiration that would guide her in the performances to come. She allowed herself a moment to smile, to savor the memory of the audience's reaction and the connection she had created through her music. The room seemed to hum with energy, a reminder that her music had left a mark, however small or large, on everyone present. She understood that the power of music lay not in perfection, but in the honesty, emotion, and dedication behind each note. And she had given everything she had to this performance, and it had been received with warmth, admiration, and awe. As she left the hall, she carried with her a sense of fulfillment and pride, but also a quiet humility. She knew that every performance would present new challenges, but the experience of today had taught her that she could rise above fear, mockery, and doubt. She had transformed skepticism into admiration, laughter into respect, and nervousness into triumph. This was a moment she would remember forever, a reminder that music had the power to connect, to inspire, and to reveal the strength of the human spirit. She stepped off the stage, her body still buzzing from the energy of the last performance. The applause had faded, but the echoes of excitement and admiration lingered in her mind. She had faced a room full of people, including the famous pianist who had once mocked her, and she had poured every ounce of her emotion and skill into her music. Now, as she walked through the backstage area, she allowed herself to take a moment to reflect on what had just happened. It was more than a performance. It was a triumph, a personal victory, and a validation of all the hard work, dedication, and courage she had invested in her art. Her thoughts drifted to the long journey that had brought her here. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the small apartment where her piano sat, the evenings she had spent perfecting scales and pieces while the world outside moved on without her. She had faced self-doubt, moments when she questioned her talent, and the discouragement of those who didn't believe she could make it. But she had persevered, driven by a love of music and a determination to let her voice be heard. Each challenge she had overcome had prepared her for this moment, and the memory of it filled her with a quiet sense of pride. The famous pianist approached her once more. This time, there was no smirk, no trace of mockery, only a genuine expression of respect. He spoke softly, acknowledging her skill, creativity, and the emotional power of her performance. He told her that he had underestimated her, that she had surpassed expectations in a way that few could achieve. She listened, feeling a mix of humility and satisfaction. His recognition was meaningful, but it was not the only validation she felt. She had proven to herself that she could rise above doubt, fear, and ridicule and express her true self through music. As she moved through the hall, she could see people still discussing the performance, their faces animated with amazement. Some were in small groups, replaying what they had heard in their minds, while others approached her with words of praise and encouragement. She felt a deep connection to these strangers, a bond formed through the shared experience of music. The realization that her performance had touched so many hearts was both humbling and exhilarating. She understood now that music had the power to reach people on a level that transcended words, and she had tapped into that power with sincerity and passion. She thought about the impact this performance might have on her future. Invitations to perform at other venues, opportunities to collaborate with other musicians, and even offers for mentorship and guidance could follow. But beyond the practical benefits, What mattered most was the confidence she had gained and the knowledge that she had faced a formidable challenge and succeeded. The experience had strengthened her belief in her own abilities, and that self-assurance would guide her in all her future endeavors. Back in the quiet of the dressing room, she allowed herself a moment to breathe fully and relax. She reflected on the feelings that had accompanied her throughout the day, the nervous anticipation, the fear of failure, the tension of scrutiny, and finally, the exhilaration and pride of accomplishment. She realized that these emotions were not obstacles but companions, guiding her, shaping her, and giving her performance depth and authenticity. She had transformed anxiety into focus, doubt into determination, and fear into expression, and that transformation had been visible to everyone who had witnessed her play. The memory of the famous pianist's initial mockery came to mind, but it no longer carried power over her. It had been a catalyst, a challenge that had pushed her to reach higher, to dig deeper, and to express more than she ever thought possible. She understood that criticism, whether harsh or dismissive, could be used as fuel if approached with the right mindset. She had taken that energy and channeled it into her art, turning a moment of potential humiliation into a defining experience. She thought about the audience once more. Each person had come with their own expectations, their own biases, and yet she had managed to reach them, to surprise them, and to leave a lasting impression. Some had doubted her, some had expected mediocrity, and some had been genuinely curious. By the end of her performance, she had captured the hearts of all of them, creating a shared experience that would linger in their memories. The power of music to unite, inspire, and transform had been made real before her eyes, and she had been at the center of it. As she packed her things and prepared to leave the hall, she reflected on what this day had taught her about resilience and courage. Talent alone was not enough. It was the willingness to face fear, the ability to persevere, and the authenticity of expression that created a truly remarkable performance. She had proven that she could rise above ridicule and doubt and convey something genuine and powerful. This understanding would guide her in all her future performances, reminding her that the strength of her expression and the honesty of her emotions were what truly mattered. She walked out into the cool evening air, the sounds of the city surrounding her. She felt a lightness in her step, a sense of freedom and possibility that had been hard to imagine before the performance. The day had been a turning point, a moment when she had confronted challenges head-on and emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of her path. She knew that her journey as a musician was just beginning, but she also knew that she had discovered a new level of courage and artistry that would stay with her forever. As she made her way home, she thought about the people who had supported her along the way, the family members, teachers, and friends who had encouraged her, challenged her, and believed in her talent even when she doubted herself. Their support had been invaluable, providing a foundation of confidence and motivation that had helped her reach this moment. She felt gratitude for each of them, understanding that her success was built not only on her own efforts, but on the encouragement and belief of those who had stood by her. That night, as she reflected on the events of the day, she realized that the performance had changed her in ways that went beyond the applause and recognition. She had learned to trust herself, to channel her emotions into her music, and to rise above fear and doubt. She had experienced the transformative power of music firsthand, and she had discovered the strength that came from facing challenges with determination and authenticity. These lessons would stay with her, guiding her through future performances and shaping the musician and person she was becoming. She also understood that this experience was not an end but a beginning. There would be other stages, other audiences, other challenges. But the memory of this day, the connection she had made with the audience, and the recognition she had earned would serve as a source of confidence and inspiration. She had learned that the combination of talent, perseverance, and emotional honesty could overcome skepticism and create moments of lasting impact. In the quiet moments before sleep, she replayed the performance in her mind, remembering the delicate notes, the powerful crescendos, and the moments of intimate reflection. She smiled, knowing that she had shared her heart with the audience, that her music had reached them in a way that words never could. The experience had reaffirmed her belief in the power of music and in her own ability to convey emotion, tell a story, and connect with others. It was a lesson she would carry with her always, a reminder of the courage, dedication, and authenticity required to create something truly remarkable. She drifted off to sleep with a sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. The journey had been long and challenging, but the reward had been extraordinary. She had faced doubt and mockery, conquered her fears, and shared her music with the world in a way that moved hearts and inspired minds. And as she dreamed, she knew that the path ahead would be filled with new challenges, new stages, and new opportunities to express herself and touch others through the language she loved most. She had discovered the power within herself, and it was a power that would continue to grow, guiding her through every performance, every challenge, and every triumph yet to come.